The blizzard was merciless, tearing across the mountains like a living nightmare. In that freezing darkness, a little girl no older than 8 lay curled in the snow, clutching her tiny puppy as its shivers grew weaker and weaker. She cried for help, but the wind swallowed every sound. Moments earlier, the unthinkable had happened. Her own father had driven away, leaving her to die in the cold. She thought it was the end. She thought no one would ever find her, but fate had other plans because miles away, a Navy SEAL fighting through the storm slammed on his brakes, seeing something he couldn't ignore. A small, motionless shape. A child. A puppy, and he realized he was their only chance to survive. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The blizzard roared across the mountains like a living beast, swallowing the world in white. Snow poured from the sky in thick, merciless sheets, burying everything it touched. The forest, once full of life and sound, now stood frozen and silent under the icy moonlight. Even the towering pines bowed under the weight of the storm, their branches trembling in the howling wind. And in the middle of that endless, brutal cold sat a little girl, no older than 8, shivering violently as she hugged a tiny German Shepherd puppy to her chest. Her torn pink sweater was soaked through, clinging to her trembling body as if it too was fighting for warmth. Her breath came out in shaky clouds, each one thinner than the last. The puppy whimpered, its small body shaking in her arms, its fur coated with a thin layer of snow. She pulled it closer, her numb fingers struggling to hold on. Tears rolled down her cheeks, freezing almost instantly. She didn't understand why it had happened. She didn't understand why she'd been left there. All she knew was that her father's car had driven away too fast, and that she was alone now in a place where no child should ever be. The darkness around her deepened, the storm growing louder, harsher, more unforgiving. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. The cold had already stolen too much strength. She collapsed beside a snow-covered boulder, clutching the puppy tighter. "Please," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Somebody help." But her voice was swallowed by the roaring wind, fading before it could reach anyone. As the storm pressed harder and her eyes fluttered with exhaustion, it felt like the mountains themselves were preparing to claim her forever. She didn't know it yet, but someone was already running toward her. Her father had always been a man who measured life in numbers, profits, losses, deals, and deadlines. To him, emotions were liabilities and people were pieces to be moved around for convenience. Even his own daughter, Lily, had become just another responsibility he never truly wanted. After her mother passed away 2 years earlier, he grew colder, buried himself even deeper into business, and distanced himself from anything that reminded him of the life he once had. Lily, with her soft voice and gentle heart, became a reminder he didn't want to face. And the puppy, an unwanted gift from a neighbor, only added one more thing he didn't care to manage. His wealth had insulated him from consequences for years. Investors praised him, partners feared him, and employees obeyed him without question. That power made him believe he could escape any mistake, erase any problem, walk away from anything that didn't fit his plans. Tonight, Lily had simply become another inconvenience in his eyes. He'd been driving fast, irritated, frustrated, and overwhelmed by a deal that was falling apart. When Lily begged to keep the puppy, when she cried because she was scared of the storm, something inside him snapped, something cruel, something selfish. The snowstorm had hit harder than he expected. The road grew slippery, visibility dropped to nothing, and panic clawed at him. Instead of calming his daughter, instead of protecting her, he made the decision that would haunt him forever. He pulled the car over near the forest's edge, yelling at Lily to stop crying. She clutched the puppy tighter, her small voice pleading, "Daddy, please don't leave me here." But the man who should have held her, comforted her, shielded her, simply didn't. He shoved the door open, ordered her out, and forced the puppy into her arms. Her shoes sank into the snow, her face pale with confusion and fear. She tried to step back inside, but he shut the door before she could speak. The engine roared. The tires spun. And the wealthy man, wrapped in expensive pride, drove away convincing himself it was only temporary, that she'd be fine, that someone would find her, but he never looked back. Not even once. The night grew darker as Lily stumbled deeper into the snow, her tiny legs sinking with every step. The wind lashed against her face, sharp as broken glass, making her eyes sting. She held the puppy close, feeling its weak heartbeat against her chest, each thump softer than the last. "Please stay awake," she whispered, brushing snowflakes off its little ears. But the puppy was shivering uncontrollably, its breaths short and rapid. Lily tried to shield it with her arms, but her fingers were numb, her sleeves frozen stiff. She was too small, too cold, too fragile to fight the storm alone. She tried to follow the faint tire tracks left by her father's car, but the blizzard erased them faster than she could move. The forest around her seemed to close in, swallowing every sound except the howl of the wind. Her tears mixed with the snow, turning icy as they slid down her cheeks. Each breath burned her lungs, and her knees buckled more often with every attempt to stand. She had never felt pain like this, cold that seeped into her bones, fear that wrapped around her heart, and loneliness that made the world feel impossibly wide. Eventually, she sank to the ground beside a fallen log, too exhausted to take another step. The snow piled around her legs, rising like a creeping tide, heavy and merciless. She curled her body around the puppy, trying to give it whatever warmth she had left. The little creature whimpered softly, nudging its nose into her sweater, searching for safety. Lily closed her eyes for a moment, imagining her mother's voice, warm, gentle, comforting, telling her to be brave. But courage felt impossible in that frozen silence. Her breaths grew slower, her eyelids heavier. She whispered a final plea into the storm, her voice barely audible. "Mom, please send someone." The wind swallowed her words instantly, carrying them into the darkness. As her consciousness flickered like a dying flame, Lily hugged the puppy closer, fearing it would fall asleep and never wake again. Hope was slipping away. And she didn't know if she'd ever open her eyes again, miles away from the nearest town. Navy SEAL Daniel Cole was driving through the storm, his headlights cutting thin tunnels of light through the swirling snow. He had seen harsh weather before, sandstorms overseas, hurricanes on rescue deployments, but this blizzard felt different, wild, dangerous, alive. His instincts prickled. The same instincts that had saved his life more times than he could count. Something was wrong in these mountains tonight? He could feel it in his gut, a quiet alarm ringing deep inside him. Then he saw it, tread taillights disappearing fast into the storm, swerving recklessly down the icy road. At first, Daniel thought the driver was just panicking, trying to outrun the blizzard. But then his eyes caught something else, something that made his grip tighten on the wheel. A small shape on the side of the road. No movement. No signs of life. Just a small mound sinking beneath the falling snow. Daniel slowed down immediately, heart pounding as he peered through the frost-covered windshield. He stepped out into the storm, boots crunching on the frozen ground. The wind slapped his face, but he pushed forward, scanning the area with trained precision. As he approached the snow-covered shape, his breath caught. It wasn't a fallen branch. It wasn't an animal. It was a child. A little girl curled against a large rock, her thin pink sweater stiff with ice. And in her arms, barely breathing, a tiny German Shepherd puppy. Daniel dropped to his knees, checking her pulse with shaking urgency. She was alive but fading fast. Hey, stay with me," he murmured, brushing snow from her face. Her skin was frighteningly cold. The puppy let out a weak whimper, its eyes barely open. Daniel looked around the empty road, jaw tightening. Someone had left them here. And whoever it was, they had driven away without. A second thought. Daniel's training surged to the surface like a switch flipping inside him. Years of missions, rescues, and impossible situations had conditioned him to think faster under pressure than most people could think at all. He slid his arms beneath the girl's small body, careful not to jostle the trembling puppy pressed against her chest. "You're safe now," he whispered, voice steady despite the storm's roar. Her skin felt like ice. Hypothermia was setting in fast. He didn't have minutes to spare. He had seconds. He stood, shielding the girl with his body as the wind slammed into them. The cold gnawed at his exposed skin, but he ignored it, turning toward his truck parked on the roadside. Every step through the thickening snow felt like a battle, but he pushed forward, boots sinking deep, muscles tightening against the biting wind. The girl's head rested against his shoulder, her breath barely noticeable. "Come on, kid. Just hold on," he muttered through gritted teeth. The puppy whimpered, burying its nose into her sweater, trying desperately to cling to life. Reaching the truck, Daniel yanked the door open and climbed inside, placing the girl gently across the passenger seat. The puppy collapsed beside her, its tiny chest rising unevenly. Daniel immediately cranked the heater to full blast. The vents sputtered warm air, but it would take precious minutes to heat the freezing cabin. He grabbed an emergency thermal blanket from the glove compartment and wrapped it around both of them. Tucking the edges tightly to trap any warmth, his hands moved quickly, checking her breathing, her pulse, her pupils. Slowed but reactive. She was fighting. "That's it. Stay with me," he encouraged, brushing a strand of frozen hair from her forehead. Outside, the storm pummeled the truck with fierce gusts, rattling the metal as if trying to break inside. Daniel glanced at the empty road, the direction the car had vanished earlier. Someone had left this child to die. That truth burned in him like a spark threatening to ignite. He clenched the steering wheel, jaw set. Whoever abandoned her had no idea a Navy SEAL had just taken over. And he wasn't letting her go. Daniel slammed the truck into gear and gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white as the tires fought for traction on the icy road. The blizzard howled louder than before, slashing across the windshield in thick waves. He leaned forward, scanning for any hint of the road beneath the snow. Visibility was shrinking by the second. But stopping wasn't an option, not with the girl's shallow breaths fading beside him. He tossed a quick glance at her, tucked under the emergency blanket, her pale face barely visible. The puppy curled against her neck, its tiny body trembling uncontrollably. They were both dangerously close to slipping away. He pressed harder on the gas, willing the truck forward. Every patch of black ice threatened to send them spinning into the ravine, but Daniel's combat driving instincts kept him steady. He'd driven through burning deserts, collapsing cities, flooded war zones, but this storm felt like its own battlefield. "Stay with me, kid," he murmured, adjusting the heat vents toward her. Warm air finally began filling the cabin, melting the frost on the windows. But they needed more than warmth. They needed shelter and medical attention fast. The nearest town was 20 miles away. Too far. Too dangerous. Daniel grabbed the radio on the dash and switched frequencies. Static. The storm was blocking all signals. He cursed quietly under his breath. Alone again? Just like too many nights overseas? But this time, the mission wasn't a team of soldiers. It was a fragile little girl and a helpless puppy depending solely on him. As he made another sharp turn, the truck's headlights caught the glimmer of a trail leading into the woods, an old logging path he vaguely remembered from earlier rescue briefings. It wasn't on most maps, but he knew where it led, a remote ranger cabin stocked with emergency supplies. He didn't hesitate. He cranked the wheel and turned onto the hidden path, snow spraying like shattered glass around the truck. Tonight, that cabin wasn't just shelter. It was the only chance they had to survive. The logging path was narrow and nearly invisible beneath the storm's fury, but Daniel pushed through it with unwavering focus. Branches scraped against the truck, snow piled high around the tires, and the engine groaned under the strain. Still, he pressed on. He knew the cabin was close. He remembered seeing it during a wildfire rescue 2 years earlier. Back then, it was just an emergency outpost. Tonight, it was their lifeline. When the faint outline of a structure finally emerged through the blizzard, Daniel exhaled in relief he didn't realize he'd been holding. He pulled the truck beside the cabin and jumped out. Instantly greeted by a blast of freezing wind, he yanked open the passenger door and scooped the girl into his arms, blanket and all. The puppy whimpered softly as it slid into the warmth of his jacket. Daniel shielded both of them with his body as he trudged through the knee-deep snow, boots sinking heavily with each step. The cabin door was stuck from ice buildup, but one strong shove forced it open. Warmth didn't greet him. Darkness did. He flicked on his flashlight and swept it across the cabin interior, rough wooden walls, a stone fireplace, a metal cot, and shelves stocked with old emergency gear. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. He laid the girl on the cot gently, adjusting the blanket around her small body. The puppy curled against her neck, breathing in weak, uneven gasps. Daniel moved fast, grabbing firewood from the corner and striking a match. The flame caught slowly, then grew into a steady burn, spreading precious heat through the room. He checked the girl's pulse. Still weak. Still shallow, but present. "Hang in there," he murmured softly, brushing her cold cheek. The storm raged outside, but in that small cabin. Their fight for life had finally begun. The fire crackled softly, its glow dancing across the wooden walls as heat slowly filled the room. Daniel sat beside the cot, rubbing his hands together to bring blood back into his fingertips. Hours had passed long, tense hours while he monitored the girl's breathing and checked her temperature again and again. The puppy had stopped trembling and now slept curled up against her chest, its body rising and falling in tiny, steady breaths. For the first time since the rescue, Daniel allowed himself a moment of hope. They were stabilizing, but they were far from safe. Then, finally, the girl stirred. Her eyelashes fluttered, her brows tightening as if waking from a nightmare. Daniel leaned forward, voice gentle. "Hey, you're okay? You're safe now." Her eyes opened slowly, large, frightened, glazed with confusion. She looked around the dim cabin, then down at the puppy, and a quiet sob escaped her lips. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Easy, you're not alone anymore." Her voice was barely a whisper. Where's my dad?" Daniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I didn't see him." "I only found you." Her eyes filled with fresh tears. She clutched the puppy tightly, burying her face in its fur. He left," she choked, the words trembling as they escaped her. Daniel's chest tightened. He'd suspected it, but hearing it confirmed, he felt anger simmer beneath the surface. "Do you remember what happened?" he asked softly. Lily nodded faintly. "He was yelling. He said I ruined everything. He didn't want me crying. He said I keep messing up his life." Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Then he stopped the car and told me to get out. I thought he'd come back. But he didn't." Daniel swallowed hard. The storm outside roared louder, but inside the cabin, the silence felt heavier than the blizzard. He reached for a blanket and tucked it around her shoulders. "None of that is your fault," he said firmly. "What he did was wrong, but you're safe now. I promise." Lily looked up at him, small, broken, hopeful. "Are you going to leave too?" Daniel shook his head without hesitation. "Not a chance." As the fire warmed the cabin, Lily gently stroked the puppy's fur, her tiny fingers still trembling from the cold and fear. Daniel watched the little creature lift its head, its ears twitching as it tried to gather the strength to sit up. There was something determined in the puppy's eyes, something fragile yet fiercely loyal. Daniel had seen that look before, in working dogs he served alongside overseas. Dogs who would rather collapse than abandon the ones they loved. He shifted closer, studying the puppy with a practiced eye. "He's tougher than he looks," Daniel murmured softly. Lily nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "His name is Scout," she whispered. "My mom gave him to me before she died." The words lingered in the air, heavy and delicate. Daniel's expression softened. Suddenly the puppy wasn't just a pet, it was the last piece of a mother a little girl still mourned. Lily continued shakily. "Dad didn't like him. He kept saying Scout was a waste of time, and that I should forget about him." She hugged the puppy closer. "But Mom said Scout would always protect me." Daniel swallowed hard. He'd met people hardened by life, broken by loss. But hearing it from a child this young tore at him in a way nothing on the battlefield ever had. "Your mom was right," he said gently. "He stayed with you even when things got hard. That makes him a hero in my book." Lily's eyes glistened with a small spark of hope. He kept barking when Dad yelled, she whispered. He tried to stand between us even though he was scared. I think he knew something bad was going to happen. Daniel looked at Scout, who gave a soft, determined whine, and something clicked inside him. Dogs didn't just sense danger, they sensed people. This puppy, small as he was, had instincts sharper than most adults. And he'd fought to protect the only person he had left. Daniel reached out and gently scratched behind Scout's ear. You're a brave little soldier, he murmured. Scout lifted his head proudly, as if he understood his mission. Wasn't over yet, the storm had quieted by morning, leaving the forest wrapped in a soft blanket of white. Pale sunlight filtered through the frosted windows of the cabin, casting a gentle glow across Lily as she slept peacefully for the first time in hours. Scout curled at her side, breathing steadily. Daniel let out a slow breath, relieved to see both of them recovering. He stepped outside to gather more firewood, the crisp air biting at his cheeks. But as he walked toward a nearby tree line, he froze. Tire tracks, fresh ones, cut through the snow. Someone had driven up the narrow logging path. Someone who shouldn't have been able to find this place. Daniel's instincts sharpened instantly. He straightened, scanning the woods with narrowed eyes. A moment later, an engine rumbled in the distance, growing louder until a black luxury SUV appeared through the trees. The doors swung open before the vehicle even stopped moving. Lily's father stepped out, coat dusted with snow, hair disheveled, eyes wild, not with worry, but something else entirely. Panic, greed, guilt. Daniel could read men like open books, and this one wasn't here to apologize. The man marched toward him, voice raised. Where is she? He barked. Where's my daughter? Daniel stood his ground. Inside, safe. The father's jaw clenched. Good, I need her back now. You had no right to take her. Daniel stared at him, stunned by the audacity. Take her? He echoed. I found her half dead in a blizzard. The man flinched, but his gaze darted back toward the cabin. She wasn't supposed to wander off, he snapped. I'm responsible for her. You've done enough. Daniel's eyes hardened. Everything about the man, his shaky tone, frantic movements, told a story he wasn't ready to admit. This wasn't a rescue for him. It was damage control. Daniel stepped forward, positioning himself between the father and the cabin door. His posture was calm, but there was an unmistakable steel in his stance, the kind that came from years of command, danger, and discipline. The father hesitated, taken aback by the quiet authority radiating from him. Move, he demanded, voice shaking with a blend of fear and stubborn pride. She's my daughter. I don't need permission to take her. Daniel didn't flinch. Your daughter nearly froze to death, he said evenly. And I found no signs of an accident. No sign you were looking for her? Just tracks leading away. His words hung in the cold air like frost. The father swallowed hard, eyes darting to the ground. You don't understand, he muttered. Things got out of control. Explain it, Daniel pressed, voice low but firm. Because from where I'm standing it looks like you abandoned a child in a blizzard. The father bristled, anger returning as he tried to salvage control. You don't know what it's like? He snapped. She cries over everything. She clings to that stupid dog. I was dealing with $1 million crisis and she wouldn't stop. Everyone has breaking points. Daniel's jaw tightened. Your breaking point doesn't get to be your daughter's death sentence. The father's face twisted with defensiveness. I was going to come back for her. I just needed time to think, time to calm down. You don't know my life. You don't know what I'm dealing with? Daniel stepped closer, his voice dropping to a razor-edged whisper. I don't need to know your life. I saw what she lived through last night. His eyes hardened, reflecting the memory of Lily's icy skin, her choked breathing, her desperate whisper for help. If I'd been 10 minutes later, she wouldn't be alive right now. Silence fell heavy between them. The father opened his mouth to argue again. But the words died when Daniel added, and that little dog Scout never left her side. Even as she froze, he protected her. Can you say the same? The father's eyes flickered with guilt. And for the first time, his certainty cracked. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. The wind rustled through the frozen trees, carrying the weight of everything unsaid between them. The father watched him carefully, confused by the shift in Daniel's expression, a look that was no longer just anger, but something older. Heavier, Daniel exhaled slowly, the breath misting in the cold air before he finally spoke. "You think I don't understand pressure," he said quietly. "But you have no idea what pressure really is." The father frowned, thrown off. Daniel looked past him, gaze drifting toward the snow-covered ridge as memories clawed their way back. "Years ago," he began, "I was deployed overseas. Our unit was assigned to evacuate civilians during a surprise attack. Chaos everywhere, smoke, fire, rapid gunfire." His voice stayed steady, but his eyes hardened. "There was a little girl there, about the same age as Lily." The father swallowed, sensing where this was going. "We got her out," Daniel continued, "but her parents didn't make it. She held my hand the whole way, shaking, crying, begging me not to leave her. I promised I wouldn't." His jaw tightened. "But during the extraction, there was an explosion. We got separated for just a moment. One moment." His fingers curled slightly, as if still reaching for someone he couldn't save. "I found her again, but it was too late." A heavy silence fell. Daniel blinked away the memory before looking directly at the man in front of him. "So don't stand there and tell me I don't understand what you're dealing with," he said, voice firm yet low. "I would give anything to go back and protect that little girl. To keep my promise." The father stood frozen, the blizzard around them seeming to quiet as Daniel's words settled like snowfall. "You got a second chance," Daniel said slowly. "You got to walk away from that road with your daughter still alive. And instead of holding on to her, you let your frustration decide her fate." The father's face crumpled, not fully, but enough to show the first hint of real remorse. Daniel stepped back, gaze steady. "I won't let you fail her again." Before the father could respond, the wind shifted violently, sweeping across the ridge with a sudden force that made Daniel turn sharply toward the trees. The soft morning quiet shattered as a deep rumble echoed through the forest. Snow from the upper slopes trembled, sliding in thin sheets. Daniel's instincts roared back to life. He knew that sound. He'd heard it in mountain operations before, right before everything collapsed. "Get back!" he barked, grabbing the father by the arm and shoving him away from the cabin path. A thunderous crack split the air. A massive section of the snow-covered hillside broke loose, tumbling downward like a white river unleashed. An avalanche, fast, brutal, deadly. The father stumbled back, eyes widening in horror as he watched the roaring slide swallow everything in its path. Trees snapped like twigs beneath the crushing weight. Daniel's heart pounded not for himself, but for Lily and Scout inside the cabin. If the avalanche hit directly, the structure wouldn't survive. He sprinted toward the door. "Lily!" he shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the avalanche's roar. The father chased after him, panic finally stripping away his arrogance. "My daughter! Help her!" he cried, desperation breaking through his voice. Daniel didn't waste breath answering. He slammed into the cabin, snow blasting in behind him. Lily sat upright on the cot, clutching Scout with wide, terrified eyes. "Daniel?" she whispered. He scooped her into his arms without hesitation, the puppy pressed tightly between them. "Hold on," he commanded. "Don't let go." The father reached the doorway as Daniel pushed past him. Together, the three ran into the storm, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Snow crashed closer, stealing precious seconds. Daniel spotted a narrow gap between two boulders, a natural shelter. "Go!" he shouted. The blizzard roared as they dove inside. Just as the mountain came down, the world outside exploded into a deafening roar as the avalanche slammed across the mountainside. Snow surged past the boulders like a raging white river, shaking the ground beneath them. Daniel shielded Lily with his body, trapping her safely between his arms while Scout whimpered under her chin. The father pressed himself against the rock wall, trembling, his breath coming in ragged bursts. For several agonizing seconds, the storm's fury rumbled overhead, then slowly began to fade into a suffocating, Eerie silence. Daniel lifted his head first. Snow dusted his hair and shoulders like frost on iron. "You two okay?" he asked, voice steady despite the adrenaline burning through him. Lily nodded weakly, clutching Scout tighter. "I'm okay." "Because of you?" Her father swallowed hard, looking between them with a mixture of guilt and awe. I thought we were done," he whispered. Daniel didn't answer right away. His focus shifted to the cabin, or rather, where the cabin had been. Asterisk. Through the settling mist of snow, the structure was nowhere in sight. The avalanche had torn straight across it, burying it completely. If they had been seconds later, they wouldn't be alive. Daniel exhaled the truth in a breath he didn't want to imagine. "We can't stay here," he said. "We need to move before the temperature drops again." He guided them back onto the path, carving a route through the chest-deep snow. The father struggled to keep up, his legs shaking, his breath shallow. But for the first time, he didn't complain. He didn't bark orders. He just followed, quiet, humbled, changed. When he stumbled, Daniel grabbed his arm without judgment. Lily watched the interaction, her small voice breaking the silence. "Dad, why did you come back?" The man stopped, snowflakes clinging to his lashes. Shame tightened his features. "Because I realized I was about to lose the only thing that ever truly mattered." His voice cracked. "And I didn't deserve another chance, but I prayed for one anyway." Daniel tightened his grip on Lily, shielding her from the wind. "Then don't waste it," he said firmly, and together, pushing through the storm's aftermath, they walked toward a second chance none of them expected. By the time they reached the main road, the storm had weakened into a gentle snowfall, the early morning sun glowing faintly behind drifting clouds. Daniel waved down a passing ranger vehicle, and within minutes, Lily and Scout were wrapped in warm blankets in the back seat, a heater humming beside them. Lily leaned against Daniel's shoulder, her tiny fingers gripping his sleeve as if afraid he might disappear. Scout rested across her lap, tail thumping weakly each time she whispered his name. Relief washed over Daniel, heavy and warm, stronger than any exhaustion in his bones. At the hospital, doctors rushed Lily and Scout into care, praising Daniel's quick actions. The father stayed behind in the hallway, shoulders hunched, eyes red not from the cold, but from a truth finally sinking into his chest. When the doctor emerged hours later, smiling gently, Lily's father let out a breath he'd been holding too long. "She's stable," the doctor said. "Your daughter is incredibly strong. And that puppy—" He never left her side. The father entered the room slowly. Lily lay in the bed, small but safe, Scout curled beside her with a tiny bandage on his paw. When she looked up and whispered, "Dad?" the man broke. He sank to his knees beside her, tears spilling freely. "I'm so sorry," he choked. "I failed you. I failed your mother. But I promise I'll never walk away again." Lily reached out and touched his cheek, small forgiveness meeting fractured regret. Daniel watched from the doorway, a faint smile touching his lips. He didn't step in. He didn't need to. His mission was complete. As he turned to leave, Lily's voice called out softly, "Daniel, you saved us." He paused, eyes warm. "Sometimes," he said gently, "family finds you in the storm." And with Scout's soft bark echoing behind him, the Navy SEAL walked into the morning light, knowing he had saved far more than 2 lives that night.